If you could play one-on-one with anybody, current, not current, who would it be?
That's a fantastic question. Current or not current?
NBA, WNBA.
Well, like, I would get killed by every NBA player, but like Steph Curry.
You would have played one-on-one
Yeah.
with Steph Curry. I thought you were gonna say Peyton Pritchard.
That's great. Peyton Pritchard. Yes. That's a great answer.
Caitlin Clark effect.
What a show put on by Caitlin Clark.
All right, we're sitting here, not playing one-on-one with Peyton Pritchard, but we're sitting here on the precipice of your third season in the
Hard to
WNBA.
believe. It's crazy.
Where has time gone?
Truly.
It's insane.
It's wild.
So what does a successful third season look like for you?
I mean, hopefully a championship. I feel like we have all the pieces kind of put together now. We have had our core together for 3 years. Obviously last season I didn't get to play in many games, but still what we were able to do is absolutely incredible. I think having Steph, and that was her first year in our coaching staff, going into year 3, you kind of have that culture and that foundation kind of laid, and we went through so much adversity.
A concern now for Caitlin Clark. She had been dealing most recently with a groin injury.
You mentioned the playoffs last year. What was the most difficult part of having to watch that?
Yeah, I think looking back now, figuring out how to be a good leader and be a good teammate, I think that's probably what I learned the most. I think the toughest moments for me were the night before the games. You're in your hotel room and it's you're on a road trip and it's man, my team is gearing up to play in Game 5 of the semifinals to maybe go to the finals, and I know
Before Caitlin Clark was selling out arenas and breaking records that stood for decades, she was just a skinny kid from Iowa who couldn't stop thinking about basketball. Not about contracts, not about nil deals, not about college offers. Just the game, just the ball, just the pure, unfiltered joy of competing against people who were bigger, older, and supposed to be better than her. But here's the thing about Caitlin Clark. She was never supposed to be normal. Even in middle school, something about her stood out in a way that made coaches stop mid-conversation and just watch. And that kind of attention, at that kind of age, has broken more promising careers than any injury ever could. So how did she make it through? How did a kid who was being recruited before she even started high school turn into one of the most grounded, genuine, and beloved athletes in the country? The answer isn't a coach. It isn't a trainer. It isn't some elite basketball academy. It's her family. And more specifically, it's the way her parents made a series of quiet, deliberate decisions that most people never even heard about, decisions that shaped everything she became. Let's go back to 6th grade. Clark was already playing 2 grades above her age level, competing against 8th graders while her classmates were still figuring out middle school. And the basketball world had already taken notice. College programs were watching her games. Not high school games, middle school games. Think about that for a second. She's 11, maybe 12 years old, and grown adults with clipboards and scholarships to hand out are sitting in the bleachers specifically to watch her. For most families, that moment changes everything. Parents start managing the brand. They start thinking about rankings and exposure and which programs are the right fit. The kid stops being a kid and starts being a product. It happens all the time, and you can see the wreckage everywhere. Former child prodigies who burned out before they ever got the chance to fully bloom. Clark's parents chose a different path entirely. Instead of feeding her the hype, they starved it. Completely. When college letters started arriving at the house, her older brother was sent to get the mail first. Not her. Her parents made sure those envelopes never made it into her hands. When coaches were texting and calling her dad, she had no idea. None. She was off somewhere in the driveway working on her pull-up jumper, completely unaware that her future was being quietly mapped out by programs across the country. And that was exactly the point. Her parents weren't hiding things from her out of control or fear. They were protecting something far more valuable than a scholarship offer. They were protecting her childhood. They were protecting the version of her that played basketball because it made her genuinely happy, not because it came with expectations attached. That distinction is everything. Because the moment a kid starts playing for the Scouts instead of for themselves, something gets lost. Sometimes it comes back. Often it doesn't. Clark herself has talked about how blissfully unaware she was during those years. She knew, on some level, that things were a little different for her. You can't play against kids 2 years older than you and not sense that something unusual is happening. but she didn't feel the weight of it, and that's because her parents absorbed that weight on her behalf. She described it almost with a kind of fondness mixed with disbelief, the idea that she was just out there loving the sport, completely shielded from the machinery that had already started building around her name. That innocence wasn't accidental. It was engineered by two parents who understood something that a lot of people in youth sports have forgotten. The goal isn't to fast-track your kid to the top. The goal is to make sure they still want to be there when they arrive. But keeping her away from recruitment letters was only half of it. The other half was harder, more personal, and honestly more impressive. Because Caitlin Clark had a temper. Not in a scary way, but in a fierce, competitive, I refuse to lose kind of way that comes with the territory when you're wired to win. And in high school, that fire sometimes crossed lines. She got into it with her brothers. She picked up technical fouls. She pushed back when she probably should have stepped back. And her parents had a response to that behavior that was more creative and more effective than anything you'd find in a parenting book. They benched her. From her own life. Not a timeout. Not a lecture. Not a grounding in the traditional sense. They told her she couldn't go to Friday night basketball games. For a kid who lived and breathed the sport, who counted down the hours until she could be back in a gym, that punishment hit differently than anything else possibly could. You couldn't have taken her phone or her laptop and achieved the same result. You had to take basketball, because basketball was everything. And that's exactly what made it work. Every time she sat out a game she should have been at, she understood in a way that went beyond words why her behavior needed to change. It wasn't about punishment for punishment's sake. It was about teaching her that basketball was a privilege connected to who she was as a person, not just what she could do on a court. You don't get to have the thing you love most if you're not showing up as someone worth loving. That lesson stuck. You can see it in the way she carries herself today. In the way she talks about teammates, opponents, the game itself. She's intensely competitive. Anybody who's watched her play knows that. But there's a humility underneath it that doesn't always exist in athletes at her level. That humility wasn't born from failure. It was installed by two parents who refused to let success make her forget who she was supposed to be. It's a strange thing to think about. We spend so much time analyzing what makes elite athletes elite. Their training regimens, their physical gifts, their mental toughness in high-pressure moments. But we rarely talk about the soil they grew in, the environment that shaped the person before the athlete had a chance to emerge. For Clark, that environment was one where basketball was kept in its proper place. It was important. It was loved. It was taken seriously. But it was never allowed to become bigger than the life surrounding it. She had to be a good student. She had to treat people right. She had to earn the right to play, not just receive it as a birthright because she happened to be talented. And the crazy thing is, none of that diminished her. All of it made her better. The fact that she didn't know about the recruiting letters meant she wasn't playing for recruiters. The fact that she got benched when she acted out meant she learned to channel that fire into the game instead of around it. Every limitation her parents placed on her created space for something more important to grow. There's a version of Caitlin Clark's story where things go differently, where the hype gets to her early, where she starts chasing rankings instead of improvement, where the weight of expectation crushes the joy out of something she used to love freely. That version of the story exists for a lot of talented kids. We just never hear about them because they disappeared before they got the chance to matter. The version we got, the one breaking records, changing the trajectory of women's basketball, packing arenas full of fans who had never watched a WNBA game before. That version exists because two parents in Iowa decided their daughter's childhood was worth protecting, even when the rest of the world was begging to fast forward past it. That's the real story behind Caitlin Clark. Not just the records, not just the range, not just the handles or the vision or the ice in her veins when the game is on the line. It's the people who made sure she got to be a kid first so that everything else could follow naturally. And honestly, that might be the most impressive thing about her entire story.